You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us. Hi, I'm Annie from just outside Boston in the US.
And I'm Johanna from somewhere close to Vienna in Austria. And you're listening to your favorite international podcast. The podcast hosted by two women who have never met in real life, yet still insist on discussing the worst of humanity together. If you're new here, we cover true crime, murder, and mystery with respect for the victims and an appreciation for the macabre, the tragic, and the occasional, well, maybe regular.
Yeah, I would say regular.
It's a regular occurrence here, historical absurdity. I don't know, picture us in a dimly lit parlor flipping through the most unsettling pages of history by candlelight, because frankly, what else would we be doing? Maybe not candlelight though, but how about a beautiful Victorian gas lamp? I think that's nice.
No, I'll stick with candlelight. Victorian lighting scares me, as you all well know. But yeah, today's case takes place not that long ago for us, actually. We're going to be talking about the 70s and early 80s, and I don't mean the 1880s, and I don't mean the 1780s. No, we're talking about the 1980s, a time that we, as well as many of our listeners, can actively remember. It was a simpler time when parenting was sort of hoping your kid came home at dark like they were supposed to. Seatbelts were optional. Not smoking indoors was unthinkable. Smoke at the doctor's office, smoke at the grocery store, smoke anywhere you want. Everything was brown and orange.
Also, the seatbelts in the back of the car were just not available.
No, and you could just sit in the way back, It was fine. In the flatbed of trucks, the open truck bed, I think you can still do that in Florida. It's fine. Everything was orange and brown. And if you were lucky, you maybe had a car with wood paneling. This was an era of excess. Disco was dying, hair was getting bigger. And if you were in LA, your dreams were just as easy to sell as they were to shatter. Because that's where we're heading today, 1970s LA. Not only the city of angels, but also the city of dreams. More often than not, the city of broken dreams.
Yeah, it's also called La La Land, Tinseltown, the entertainment capital of the world. LA has many names. But it's not all glamour and glitz and lives in the spotlight. The famous German author Johann Wolfgang von Goethe once said, "Wo Licht ist, ist auch Schatten." And that translates to where there's light, there's also shadow. And it basically means that every positive aspect, every brilliance or success comes with its own darkness, its own struggles or dangers. And Goethe wrote these words long ago. And these words remain just as true today, I think. It's a universal truth all over the world, and I think especially for LA. Los Angeles has always been a city of extremes. The world sees the glamour, the golden glow of Hollywood, the promise of fame and fortune, but beneath all that, there's the other LA, the one of the broken dreams, as Annie said, the crime, the exploitation. This is a city of illusions with an underbelly as famous as its skyline, as famous as its Walk of Fame. It's the home of Hollywood, but also of the Black Dahlia, the Manson murders, the Night Stalker. It's a place where some people rise to stardom, while others disappear into the darkness. And in 1980, Dorothy Stratten, Playmate, actress, and a young woman with her whole life ahead of her became another name on LA's long, very long list of tragedies. And for those of you who don't know, Annie and I recently started watching Welcome to Chippendales for Cinema Macabre, which is our little spin-off series on Patreon where we discuss true crime shows and maybe movies. And if you've seen the show Welcome to Chippendales, then you know Dorothy Stratten and Paul Snider, her husband, make an appearance in the very first episode. But in true Hollywood fashion, I'd say some creative liberties were definitely taken.
That's right, because in the series, Paul Snider is depicted as having a pretty significant role in launching Chippendales. They almost act like he's one of the masterminds behind the whole enterprise. And Dorothy is portrayed as a glamorous fixture at the club who is like deeply enmeshed in that world. But we need to clarify something. The real Paul Snider's involvement with Chippendales was really minimal at best. In reality, Snider briefly crossed paths with Chippendale's founder, Steve Banerjee. And yes, he did help with early promotional ideas, but that was about it. Steve Banerjee quickly saw Snider as what he truly was, a liability. An opportunistic hustler, more desperate hanger-on than visionary entrepreneur. And as for Dorothy, she was barely involved with any of it at all. The idea that Dorothy had been deeply tied to Chippendales is pure fiction.
Exactly. But seeing their story dramatized, even though it was inaccurately portrayed, it kind of made us realize Dorothy Stratten deserved her own episode.
Absolutely. So let's start at the beginning. Dorothy Ruth Hugh Stratten was born on February 28th, 1960, in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Her parents, Simon and Nellie Hugh Stratten, were Dutch immigrants who had moved to Canada looking for a better life. Unfortunately, that dream didn't last long. Simon left the family when Dorothy was around 3 years old, leaving Nellie to raise Dorothy and her younger siblings, John Arthur, born in 1961, and Louise Beatrice, born in 1968, on her own. They lived in Coquitlam, I'm going to guess Coquitlam, a suburb of Vancouver, and while it was not the worst neighborhood, it wasn't exactly the safest area either. Dorothy grew up in a working-class home, and like a lot of first-generation kids, she understood from an early age that she was going to have to work hard if she wanted something better. There isn't too much information available on Dorothy's childhood and early life, but in airmail.news, we found an article that was written by Dorothy's younger sister, Louise, where she talks a little bit about their upbringing. And so we wanted to share some excerpts of that with you. This one is titled, it's one of these multi-part titles, Love Among the Ruins. Accompanying my sister, Dorothy Stratten, to the Playboy Mansion at 12 was a shock, but nothing could have prepared me for what followed. By Louise Stratten, as told to Sam Kashner. Quote, as a child in Vancouver, I felt like there was always something not quite right. Ours was a humble household with erratic meals and a succession of shady men courting our single mother, Petronella Hugh Stratten. Friends called her Nellie. Nellie had grown up in Holland, but was sent to an orphanage at an early age. Her father was killed fighting in World War II, and her mother, Petronella, could not cope. Nellie and her brother Art were left alone one day when Petronella went out to look for food, and neighbors called the authorities. When she returned home, her children were gone. The authorities separated my mother and my uncle, so they didn't see each other much over the years. He was placed in a mental institution because there was no room for him at the orphanage. Mum hated the orphanage, where she fought a lot, mostly defending herself. She ran away once with a friend and they got caught. She was put in isolation for a long time. How do people survive things like that? She'd had a hard childhood, but she is a high-spirited person with a good sense of humor who never became bitter. Once she had a family of her own, my mother vowed that no matter what, she was never going to lose her children. Maybe that's why I learned early on, don't tell anybody anything. Maybe that was Mum's protection against Dorothy, John, and me being taken away. Mum told me that during the war, in Holland, sometimes she was so hungry that she would eat tulip bulbs. There was always something about food with Mum. She would skip meals to make sure we were all fed. She said that she ate while she was cooking, but she never sat down with us or had anything on her plate. She would steal food. My brother and I also remember moments when suddenly Mum would say, "Get down, get down." We never knew what it meant, but we would all hit the floor. Nellie would be crawling, looking for something to protect herself. Growing up in the orphanage, hearing the bombs of World War II, must have given her PTSD. To this day, when she hears firecrackers, she starts to freak out. It's a fear that was instilled in me. I never knew my father. Mom never told us that my siblings and I came from different fathers. She said only that our father had gone back to Holland after I was born, where something had happened to him, but she never told us what, and we never asked. John, my brother, was the man of the house. Mom had boyfriends, though, and boy, John did not handle that well." End quote.
That's what you call generational trauma because of war.
Mm-hmm.
It's very sad.
Very.
By all accounts, Dorothy was a quiet, kind, and very responsible kid. She wasn't the type to cause any trouble. She went to Centennial High School, where classmates remember her as sweet and friendly, but also a little shy. She wasn't the loudest or the most outgoing girl, but she was beautiful. And not just pretty cheerleader beautiful, but the kind of stunning that made people really stop and stare when they saw her. She started working part-time at a local Dairy Queen to help out financially. Her mother, who was working at a school cafeteria, was raising the 3 kids on her own, and money was always tight. And it was there, while doing what so many teenagers do, I think, serving ice cream and making minimum wage. I think that's typical American and probably Canadian. You don't find that here.
Yeah, I did that when I was a teenager as a job.
Dorothy's life took a turn, because that's where, in 1977, she met her future husband, Paul Snider. Paul Leslie Snider was born on 15th of April 1951, also in Vancouver, and he was the second child of David and Evelyn Snider, but the oldest child, a daughter who had been born in 1948, had unfortunately passed away in 1963, so when Paul was only 2 years old. Paul's 2 younger brothers were born in 1954 and 1956. Details about his early life are also scarce. What we do know is that by the mid-1970s, Snider had carved out a niche for himself in Vancouver's nightlife scene. And by niche, I pretty much mean he was a nightclub promoter and pimp.
I was going to say, that's a really nice way of putting his...
Yeah, that's quite the
niche.
The entrepreneurial spirit.
Mm.
I think it's fair to say that Paul Snider had a knack for get-rich-quick schemes. If there was a dubious way to make $1, Paul was on it. He promoted nightclub events. I think he promoted like boating shows or something like that. He dabbled in building and selling exercise equipment. And he, quote-unquote, managed an entourage of young women in rather exploitative professions. Paul didn't have a problem with that, though, as long as it could finance his flashy lifestyle. He was absolutely fine with this. His flashy lifestyle included fur coats, gold jewelry, and a penchant for all the finer things in life, funded naturally by the women he exploited. Pulitzer Prize winner Theresa Carpenter wrote an article about Dorothy Stratten, and in it she says about Paul Snider, quote, "He didn't keep a low profile. In that he drove a black Corvette, wore a mink coat and a Star of David encrusted with jewels that he hung on his chest. He was called the quote-unquote Jewish pimp, and he cultivated that," end quote.
Adam Sandberg would play him in an SNL skit.
In early 1977, Snider's wandering eye eventually landed on 17-year-old Dorothy.
Yeah.
Dorothy had grown up to be the quintessential girl next door, beautiful, rather inexperienced, because I don't want to call that naive. You know, this naive always has this kind of negative connotation in a way, but she was kind of, inexperienced, I'd say.
Yeah.
Completely unaware of the predator in her midst or close to her.
Yeah.
Snider, ever the opportunist, saw her potential. I could be totally wrong, but I think Paul Snider could be rather charming. He wasn't bad looking at all,
No.
I'd say, and apparently he wooed her with flattery and promises of a dazzling future.
Yeah, I think Paul Snider was, among other things, just a real sociopath. I think he really could turn on the charm in order to use people in a way that served his needs. And it's not hard to imagine Dorothy and her. I know what you mean when you say like naivete, like almost just innocence. Like even if she was more worldly than other girls around her, it's all relative, right, to Paul's world, which is a very dark place. And you can just see Dorothy all sweetness and smile, serving up ice cream. I really want ice cream now. And Paul just being all flashy and turning on the charm, just dazzling her.
Yeah. 100%. I think Snider was nothing if not persistent. So he began frequenting the Dairy Queen and he was showering Dorothy with attention, which is also something narcissists do, I think. And I can totally see these personality traits in him.
Oh, yeah.
He spoke of her beauty and opportunities beyond the confines of the fast food employment. He not only complimented her about the things she felt immensely insecure about, he also painted a picture of glamour and success, and he suggested that Dorothy could be a model. And I'm sure that was very tempting for a young woman from a rather modest background.
Yeah.
Annie, what do you think? Do you think he just really wanted to support her, or did he want to take advantage of her beauty, seeing her as kind of a ticket to the big leagues in a way?
Yeah, I think both. I think he was definitely looking for a way to take advantage of her beauty,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it didn't take long, and Paul Snider, with some smooth talking, convinced Dorothy to participate in a professional photo shoot, aiming to submit her images to Playboy's Great Playmate hunt. Given that Dorothy was under the age of majority in British Columbia, her mother's consent was required, and her mother was extremely hesitant, but eventually she signed the necessary forms. I guess she too could see that Dorothy had so much potential and could have a bright future as a model, and maybe she didn't even really know what Playmate really entailed.
Of course.
I guess.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah. So what was this Great Playmate hunt? What even is a Playmate, and why were they hunted in 1978?
Sorry.
This calls for a bit of background information, really just a little bit, even though this is, again, a topic I could talk about for quite a while. It's kind of a pet topic of mine, Playboy, and the underbelly of Playboy, but okay, so before Dorothy Stratten ever set foot in Los Angeles or posed for a centerfold, there was Hugh Hefner, the man behind the Playboy magazine. Hugh Marston Hefner was born in 1926 in Chicago, into what you might call an emotionally very frugal Methodist household. His parents, Glenn Lucius Hefner, which is an amazing name in my opinion, and Grace Carolyn Swenson Hefner, they weren't exactly affectionate. Hefner later described his upbringing as rather cold and repressed, which to no one's surprise became a theme he'd spent the rest of his life rebelling against. After high school, he served in the army during World War II, enlisting in 1944 as an infantry clerk, and he contributed cartoons to military newspapers before he then was discharged in 1946. He then earned a degree in psychology from the University of Illinois. He briefly worked as a copywriter for Esquire magazine, but when they refused him a $5 raise, he just quit. That's basically his origin story.
Yeah, there's just one important part missing from the origin story, because before there was the Playboy Mansion, before the bunnies, the clubs, the notorious parties, Hugh Hefner was just a young man marrying his college sweetheart, Mildred Millie Williams. They tied the knot in 1949 and soon had 2 children, Christy and David. But this was not exactly a fairy tale beginning. Before their wedding, Millie confessed to Hef that she'd had an affair while he was away serving in the army. Hefner, who had famously saved himself for marriage, remember, he came from a very strict religious background, described this confession as the most devastating moment of his life. It might sound a bit dramatic to some, including myself, but apparently he was shooketh. That betrayal, at least according to Hefner, was the moment he decided that traditional monogamy wasn't for him. It was almost as if this single event set him on a lifelong mission to redefine relationships, sexuality, and let's be honest, how he viewed women. I keep thinking it's such a cliche, isn't it? Like that guy who was hurt by one girl one time and then just could never get his life together. And it's such a, like, everybody's over it. Life is hard sometimes. Like,
yeah.
Ugh. So Hefner embraced a lifestyle that critics argue turned women into commodities. He famously said, quote, "If women weren't sex objects, there wouldn't be another generation," end quote. And listen, whether or not you buy that Millie's betrayal truly changed Hefner forever, or if he simply used it to justify his choices later in life, there's no denying that this early heartbreak left its mark.
I can't. The quote, I can't.
He's the worst.
Yeah, so Hefner quit his job at Esquire over those $5, and he decides that what he really wanted to do is publish a men's magazine. And so he raised just over $8,000 in investments, including $1,000 from his own mother, and he got to work. The first issue featured the infamous nude photo of Marilyn Monroe. And I think most of you will know exactly which one I'm talking about. Marilyn, not yet a platinum blonde bombshell, kind of lying stretched out on red velvet. This photograph taken by Tom Kelly in 1949 wasn't originally intended for Playboy at all. Marilyn, then a struggling actress, posed nude under the pseudonym Mona Monroe for a mere $50 to pay her bills. Little did she know, this image would become legendary. Fast forward to 1953, Hugh Hefner acquires the rights to Monroe's nude photograph for $500 without her knowledge or consent. Hefner featured this captivating image as the centerfold in the inaugural issue of Playboy, which was a very strategic move that propelled the magazine to immediate success, selling over 50,000 copies. Now, one might expect Marilyn Monroe to be outraged by the unauthorized use of her image. However, her reaction was surprisingly composed and very professional. When the scandal broke and reporters uncovered that the nude in the calendar and subsequently in Playboy was indeed Marilyn, she didn't deny it. Instead, she candidly admitted she had posed for the photos out of financial necessity. Marilyn Monroe reportedly remarked to a close friend, quote, "I even had to buy a copy of the magazine to see myself in it," end quote. So ultimately, this scandal didn't really harm her career, and it sure as hell helped Hugh Hefner tremendously. And just like that, Playboy magazine was off the ground. Hefner didn't position Playboy as smut, at least not officially. He marketed it as urban, sophisticated, and intellectual. With nudity, with some nudie photos. There were interviews with world leaders, fiction by names like Nabokov and Fleming, and then the glossy photos of women posing in, girls next door outfits or bunny ears and heels. And it was really a strange mix, but it kind of worked.
It did. And men all over the world would claim that they only bought the magazine for the interviews, which the thing is, back at that time, I remember my perception of what these magazines were as a young teen. And Playboy was the classy porn.
Yeah. It was not Hustler.
Penthouse and the Hustler were the ones where if you found one of those, you were going to learn something.
Yeah.
Maybe something you shouldn't learn, but you know what I'm talking about. And Playboy just became a cultural phenomenon. By the 1960s, Hefner was rich and famous and living in what he considered a sexual utopia. He opened Playboy clubs staffed by waitresses, bunnies in corsets, and cottontails. There was a private jet called the Big Bunny, and parties that became legendary for all the wrong reasons. But while Playboy was being credited with pushing the sexual revolution forward, it was also reinforcing the idea that women were there to be looked at, consumed, and then replaced by a younger version once they hit 25. The girls next door were now centerfolds, and they didn't age well in Hefner's world. By the late 1970s, the magazine was still going strong, though the cultural tide was starting to shift. In 1978, to mark the 25th anniversary of Playboy, the magazine launched what it called the Great Playmate Hunt. This was a nationwide search for fresh faces to fill the pages of the magazines. And if you're thinking that sounds like a slightly classier version of a cattle call, you are not wrong. The hunt brought in more than 3,500 applicants, One of them was Candy Loving, who would go on to be the 25th anniversary Playmate, appearing in the January 1979 issue. But another submission arrived from Vancouver, a set of nude photos taken by a man named Paul Snider, featuring an 18-year-old girl named Dorothy Stratten.
And that's how Dorothy entered the world of Playboy, via the man who would eventually also be the end of her.
Spoiler alert.
By the way, I think you might have already guessed it. Not everyone was enamored with Paul Snider. Family, friends, and acquaintances viewed him with suspicion, noting his controlling nature and very dubious past. In the article we mentioned before, Dorothy's sister Louise recalls, quote, "One day they picked me up in Paul's Cadillac. Mom was on a rare visit to Holland to see her mother after many years, and I had been left at the house of one of her friends. The visit hadn't gone well as I suffered a freak injury after falling down an embankment on a fishing trip. I still have the scars. And I desperately missed my mother. I went back with them to their apartment, and that night Paul played the guitar for us. I woke up early Saturday morning to watch Scooby-Doo. While Paul and Dorothy were still asleep, I started snooping. And that's when I found naked Polaroids of Dorothy hidden behind the television set. I was shocked because she was always so private. What was this? I looked through the stack of Polaroids, my breath getting shorter, my heart racing, and my mouth dry. I felt like Dorothy and Paul were going to wake up any minute. I didn't want to look at the photos, but I couldn't look away. I couldn't even move my hands. I was frozen. And then I looked down at the carpet, an animal rug with a head on it. The photos were of her naked on that rug. I did a double take. I was horrified to think that these pictures had been taken by the guy who just hours earlier played the guitar for us. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. I quickly put them back, hoping they were in the same order. How could I tell Dorothy that I saw them? I was scared and I started crying. I kept repeating, "I want my mommy," until Dorothy got up and found me. She kept asking, "Are you okay? What happened?" I pretended it was pain from my fishing injury, so that was yet another secret I had to keep. Now, I was afraid of Paul. End quote. Are you surprised that he had a animal head rug? No, we're not surprised.
No. Nope. So, Paul Snider submitted Dorothy's nude photos for Playboy's Great Playmate Hunt back in 1978. Hefner's team immediately noticed Dorothy, not that she won the big anniversary title. That went to Candy Loving, as we mentioned earlier. But Dorothy stood out enough that Playboy invited her down to LA to do some test shoots.
I think I read the reason why she didn't win the anniversary title was because they figured she was too inexperienced and too innocent to handle all the attention that would come with the 25th anniversary title.
Right, of course. That makes sense. Yeah, so these test shoots, it was sort of the classic Hollywood promise. Small town girl comes to LA and suddenly she's rubbing elbows at the Playboy Mansion, working at the Playboy Club in Century City, and picking up minor roles on TV shows like Fantasy Island and Buck Rogers. Dorothy wasn't just a pretty face, although she was gorgeous. She had charisma, she had ambition, and she had Hugh Hefner himself backing her. And for someone like Paul Snider, this was definitely his lottery ticket.
By the way, about Dorothy's job at the Playboy Club in Century City, apparently she wasn't allowed to serve alcohol because she was still underage at the time, so she basically was dressed up in the typical bunny costume, and she was just standing at the door and welcoming the guests. I found that interesting.
Goodness. Yeah.
It's the same, like, did you ever watch Girls Next Door back in the early 2000s?
Very briefly, only a couple of episodes maybe.
And one of the girlfriends, Kendra, she was 19 at the time and she wasn't allowed to drink, obviously, and they had to hide if they were drinking at parties and things like this. 19 years old, can you imagine?
No. 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 And when Dorothy first arrived in LA, she was living with Paul Snider on Veteran Avenue in Westwood, in one of those apartment complexes that feels very LA, like a pool that started indoors but ended outdoors, chaises, lounges, the whole shebang. At that point, Dorothy still went by her birth name, Dorothy Stratten. But Hefner wasn't really a fan. He thought Hugh Stratton was too long and too complicated and just not star material. I'm so glad this trend is pretty much gone. Like, I feel now it's, but yeah, Hef gave her a totally new identity. Kristen Shields. You thought I was going to say Dorothy Stratten, but you're wrong. Kristen Shields.
Kristen Shields, and it's such a meh name in a way. Nothing against all the Kristen Shields out there, don't get me wrong. But if I want a star name,
yeah,
I think Dorothy Hugh Stratton is way more recognizable than Kristen Shields.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so Dorothy took this seriously enough that she told her younger sibling, who was visiting her at the time, not to call her by her real name in public. It was like, can you imagine your sister's like, if we're out, you have to call me Kristen. Like, ugh, the worst. But Kristen Shields, it didn't last long. By the next visit, Dorothy had been renamed again. This time, smartly, they just shortened her surname to Stratten. And that is how the world would come to know her, Dorothy Stratten. Dorothy was apparently such a sweetheart, way too naive and inexperienced to handle the sort of intensely toxic Hollywood scene. This is a quote from actor Max Baer Jr. You might know him as Jethro Bodine on the Beverly Hillbillies. He became friendly with Paul Snider, and this is what he had to say about Dorothy. Quote, "She didn't believe that everybody lied, and all the liars came to Los Angeles. I said to Snider, 'Do you care about her?' And he said, 'Yeah.' I said, 'Well, if you really care about her, take her back to Vancouver. She doesn't belong here,' I said. 'She's nice. She's got a great figure, got a beautiful face, and this town will destroy her." End quote.
I think it's also important to talk about what the title of Playmate of the Month actually meant for Dorothy or any young woman who found herself gracing Playboy's glossy pages. It wasn't just about pretty pictures, though of course there were plenty of that. Each Playmate got an entire pictorial spread dedicated to her, complete with the now iconic centerfold. Alongside these photographs, Playboy published a short biography, typically just a little puff piece that listed personal interests, hobbies, and something called the Playmate data sheet, which charmingly included things like measurements, birthday, and yes, the very infamous turn-ons and turn-offs.
Rainy days and wet dogs. Yeah, those are my turn-ons. Sorry. So basically it was like a Tinder profile before dating apps were really a thing.
Do you think there were Playmates? Like, this was always, I remember, as you said, like, turn-ons, walking on the beach at sunset, blah, 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 like this kind of typical cliche things.
Yeah.
I don't think there was a Playmate that said, like, turn-ons, spooky stories and Ouija boards and uranium glass collections.
Yeah. I like my very small uranium glass collection. You're right. Yeah, that's a good question. I bet there had to be some. Was Elvira ever in Playboy?
I know that she attended parties and such.
Yeah.
I can see her being like, oftentimes there were stars on the cover of Playboy magazine.
Huge stars. That's the
Huge
thing.
stars,
It's like Playboy is not in the same league as other nude magazines. Like, there was an aura of class. Stars sort of legitimized it a little bit.
But do you know that Paris Hilton also was on the cover of Playboy? And again, she didn't consent to the photos that were used there, as far as I know.
Oh, I did not know that.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Mm. In terms of money, and let's be real, the money mattered, of course. Each Playmate earned $25,000, and that was big money back in the 70s. Enough to make it very tempting, even to those who might have felt uneasy about the whole thing in a way. And if I used the inflation calculator correctly, it gave me the number of $100,000 today as an equivalent.
Yeah, that makes sense. I looked it up just to see. And in 1980, the median price of a house in LA was about $68,000. So $25,000 is like you're a third of your way to paying off the median price of a home. Whereas in 2019, it was $620,000 roughly. So yeah, it's a lot of money, $25,000 back then. And that's an expensive place to live, I should mention. Like, that's already, like, I specifically looked up LA because that would have been expensive then as now.
Yeah, definitely. And then beyond the immediate paycheck, being named Playmate of the Month opened obviously doors for modeling gigs, TV appearances, acting roles, promotional events. It could genuinely jumpstart a career, provided you navigated the pitfalls very carefully. And then, at the end of each year, one Playmate was crowned Playmate of the Year, a title that brought even bigger rewards, $100,000 as a cash prize, a cool car, and I think I read somewhere that later on, at least later on, I don't know if it was in the early days, but at least later on, that car was usually leased because Playboy wasn't that generous. Also, that's an interesting fun fact. Hugh Hefner, you all remember the famous Playboy Mansion?
Yes.
He actually rented the rooms from the company. I'm sure there was kind of some tax scheme going on there, but he rented the rooms he lived in. He and his girlfriends lived in.
Rented the rooms from himself.
Even from the company, from the Playboy.
Right.
How do you call that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting, right?
Yeah.
Also, various luxury gifts. It was glamorous, it was lucrative, and unsurprisingly, it also came with plenty of baggage.
That's right. As we said, by early 1979, Dorothy was poised to become Playboy's Playmate of the Month for August. Hefner believed she had real potential, not just for Playboy, but as an actress. It was the opportunity of a lifetime and the moment Paul Snider had been waiting for. He really wanted to seal the deal, and so, in June of 1979, just before Dorothy's big Playboy debut hit newsstands, Snider took her to Vegas and married her. Because obviously, true love means locking it down in Vegas the second your girlfriend hits the spotlight. Does it not? I mean...
Absolutely, yeah. Surprisingly, it wasn't exactly a joyful celebration, at least not to those around Dorothy. Hugh Hefner, for example, he himself openly absolutely despised Paul Snider. He called him a pimp and a hustler who was riding Dorothy's coattails. I think that's almost an exact quote.
Wow. I think if Hef thinks someone is a shady pimp, that's pretty bad.
Then there's Playboy's former photo editor, Marilyn Grabowski. She also voiced her concerns. She described Snider as controlling and manipulative. Dorothy's inner circle saw red flags everywhere. It was like a Barnum comes to town kind of red flag parade, I like to say. But Dorothy either couldn't or wouldn't see them herself. She believed in Paul. She trusted him. Maybe she also kind of just felt indebted to him for launching her career, for believing in her in the first place, for sending the photos. Yeah. Who knows? Who can say? Whatever the reason, they were married, and as Dorothy's star rose higher and higher, Snider, who had not only positioned himself as her husband, but also as her manager, smart move, became more and more jealous.
Yeah, you know what's funny? Not in a ha-ha way. It's that thing where it's the ones who cheat themselves who are so jealous in the most unhinged and just really devastating and toxic way, right? Like it's projection. It's toxic projection.
It's so projection. I said it before, I'll say it again. In German we say, wie der Schelm denkt, so ist er. As the rascal thinks, so he is.
Yeah, seriously. And Paul Snider wasn't exactly winning popularity contests at the Playboy Mansion. People who spent time there described him as someone who put almost everyone else on edge. You know, that guy, the one who shows up at the party and just immediately makes things deeply uncomfortable for everybody?
Awkward.
That was Snider. Yeah. And a lot of people remember Snider lurking around the infamous grotto.
What happens in the grotto stays in the grotto, they used to say. And I wouldn't walk in there with a black light, to be honest.
Johanna, that's because you're a pessimist. If you squint, you can pretend it's bioluminescence and you're at the shore. It's fine. Nah. Yeah. It's a problem. And Paul Snider, he's openly trying to make out with other women at the Playboy Mansion right there in full view of everyone.
He must have been so creepy.
Who are these people? Meanwhile, Dorothy, arguably the most beautiful woman at the mansion, is his wife. So, you do the math. Eventually, Snider took things too far and he was caught with another woman. And security now has a reason to just kick him off the property.
I think you're so right. I think they were looking for a reason to get rid of him.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And then Hefner was like, you're not welcome back unless Dorothy's with you. Like, get out. You're not welcome here. He had an adult timeout. He's lucky nobody beat him up.
He is. And I can really picture him as being so proud and kind of, I'm a frequent guest at the Playboy Mansion and blah, blah, like he's something. He's nothing.
He's nothing.
She was.
That's it. It's like people who name drop. It's like,
yeah,
okay.
For sure was a total name dropper.
Right?
And now, enter Peter Bogdanovich, the acclaimed director behind films like The Last Picture Show, What's Up, Dog, Paper Moon, which would be a whole other bag full of horrible facts. Bogdanovich, he was fresh out of a relationship himself and he started hanging around the Playboy Mansion. And I think he was kind of looking for inspiration there. And when he met Dorothy, he wasn't just inspired, he was smitten. He decided then and there to write a role specifically for her in his upcoming film, They All Laughed, alongside big names like Audrey Hepburn, Ben Gazzara, and John Ritter. This was supposed to be Dorothy's big break. And Bogdanovich intended They All Laughed to be a love story set in New York about how falling in love can sometimes be a huge mistake, which is a kind of foreshadowing here.
Yeah.
In a 1985 interview of Good Morning America, so 4 years after Dorothy's death, Bogdanovich confirmed that he and Dorothy had already fallen deeply in love before filming even started. Even during production of the movie, Peter had openly confessed to people on set that he was madly in love, as he said, with Dorothy. The only problem, back in LA, there he was, Paul Snider. And he knew he was losing control. Dorothy's blossoming relationship with Bogdanovich meant Snider was being cut out, emotionally, professionally, and financially. Snider's income started to dry up, and his last hold on Dorothy vanished. And by this point, Paul Snider was already grooming a teenage grocery store clerk called Patty Lorman to be his next Playboy discovery. Lorman had moved into the West Los Angeles house Snider had shared with Dorothy, and she described Snider as distraught, obsessively writing songs for Dorothy, crying on the couch, and lamenting that Dorothy no longer showed him affection.
I hate it when they do that. After returning from filming in New York, Dorothy officially moved into Bogdanovich's Bel Air home. Despite Snider's erratic behavior, Dorothy still sought an amicable separation. Basically, he was terrible to her, physically, emotionally, just in all possible ways, as bad as could be, and she was still trying very hard to be nice and do this in a nice way. She even offered him a financial settlement, acknowledging his role in bringing her to Hollywood. She really tried so hard to make this break as clean and fair and amicable as possible. But Snider was not looking for fairness. He just wanted control, and he didn't have it. And it's around this time that he attempted to get a gun. At one point, Snider borrowed a .38 revolver from a friend and even waited outside Bogdanovich's house with it. Next, he got his hands on a 12-gauge shotgun. Apparently, he had found one for sale in the classified ads and picked it up on the night of August 13th, 1980. So basically now, Snider is armed, dangerous, and frighteningly close to the breaking point. On August 14th, 1980, so the next day, Dorothy agrees to meet Snider at their former home to discuss financial matters and finalize their separation. Dorothy could not perceive the darkness lurking within Paul Snider. She did not believe he would ever really try to harm her, even though Peter Bogdanovich and some of her other friends had strongly advised Dorothy against meeting Snider alone. They feared for her safety. They recognized the volatility in Snider's behavior. Yet Dorothy, ever compassionate, believed that she could reason with him. She resorted to sneaking around, lying about her whereabouts, convinced she could handle the situation herself. Dorothy's sister Louise recalls, quote, "When Dorothy went to Paul's apartment on the day of her death, August 14th, 1980, as a final visit to the man she was divorcing in order to be with Peter, I was in the car with her. Then I changed my mind suddenly. To this day, I don't know why. I remember hearing a small voice inside me telling me to stay behind. So I had Dorothy drive me back to Peter's house in Bel Air. But when Peter later asked me about it that night, did she talk to Paul today? Did she see him? My answer was no. Only I knew she had gone there, and Dorothy had asked me to keep it secret. I remember sitting at the long wooden table with Peter that fateful night. I remember looking at the time and it said 11 o'clock. She was supposed to pick me up at 2 o'clock that afternoon to get a pair of Capezio flats that I admired that were just like the ones she always wore. I waited, and I waited, and I waited. When it began to get dark, I was extremely worried because Dorothy was never late. She didn't come home. Peter looked troubled. I knew where Dorothy was, but I kept it to myself. At that point, I was disappointed and angry at her for not coming back. I was confused as to why she didn't at least call the house. I felt abandoned because she always kept her word. I remember that he was eating coffee-flavored Haagen-Dazs right out of the carton when I finally told Peter where Dorothy had gone. He dropped the spoon. He turned white, as if all the blood had drained out of his face, and he left the room. I didn't see him again until Dorothy's funeral." End quote.
So what had happened on the morning of 14th of August? Patty Lorman was made aware that Dorothy was coming to meet Paul Snider, so she chose to leave the house, maybe in a way intuitively avoiding the storm that was about to unfold. They were also living with another housemate, a man named Stephen, who had been absent since the previous night, spending time at his girlfriend's place and then heading straight to work. And when he returned home that evening, he noticed both Dorothy's Mercury Cougar and Snider's Mercedes with the vanity plate star 80 parked outside. And he was just assuming that Dorothy and Snider were reconciling. Stephen and Patty settled upstairs to watch TV, giving the couple privacy. Hours passed in unsettling silence. You know, this kind of feeling when it's just too quiet and it shouldn't be that quiet. And they were starting to grow concerned, and so they decided to check on them. They knocked, but nobody responded. So finally, they decided to open Paul's bedroom door to take a look what was going on inside there. I think they must have sensed that something really bad might be waiting on the other side of that door.
Yeah, it was never going to be anything good, was it?
And they were right, because what they found was like straight out of a nightmare. There, in the bedroom, were the naked and lifeless bodies of Dorothy Stratten and Paul Snider. Investigations quickly revealed the horrific sequence of events. Snider had raped Dorothy, then shot her in the face with a 12-gauge shotgun before turning the weapon on himself. Dorothy at the time was just 20 years old. And the assault and murder were Snider's twisted attempts to reclaim power over Dorothy, thinking he had no future without her, consumed by the thought of her moving on, and so Snider chose to end both of their lives in this absolutely horrific way.
Yeah. The murder-suicide sent shockwaves through Hollywood. Of course, Peter Bogdanovich was devastated. He channeled his grief into writing The Killing of the Unicorn, Dorothy Stratten, 1960 to 1980, a memoir that not only recounted their relationship, but also criticized the exploitive nature of the entertainment industry, particularly targeting Hugh Hefner and the Playboy empire.
So I looked, because I wanted to read it for we were researching this episode, and I think this book is now out of print. I tried to find it, but the ones I found, they sell for hundreds of dollars.
It's too bad that's not digital, you know?
Yeah.
So, Bogdanovich accused Hefner of creating and encouraging a culture of exploitation, one that he believed directly contributed to Dorothy's tragic end. He went even further, claiming Hefner had made unwanted advances toward Dorothy, accusations that Hefner vehemently denied. This public feud intensified the controversy surrounding Dorothy's death, leading to a bitter and very public war of words between the two men. I think at the heart of Bogdanovich's criticism was the idea that the Playboy world wasn't just about glamour and fame. Beneath the glossy magazine covers and mansion parties hid a very dark side. Young women like Dorothy, naive and hopeful, often find themselves trapped in situations they never anticipated, surrounded by powerful men who see them as commodities rather than as human beings.
I want to just add, maybe it also happens to young and inexperienced men. And we're
Yes,
only
of
starting
course.
to learn about this recently, I think. It happens to just young, inexperienced people who are exploited.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. People.
Yeah.
Yep. It happens to everybody. But we're only starting to talk about all of it.
Exactly.
So much of this stuff is only just becoming known. Yeah. And Bogdanovich's accusations sparked widespread discussions about the exploitation of women in entertainment. But rather than bringing closure, his feud with Hefner only underscored the tragedy of Dorothy's story, highlighting again how often women's lives and bodies become battlegrounds and conflicts that far outlive them. The story doesn't end here, though. Bogdanovich later married Dorothy's younger sister, Louise Stratten, who we've been quoting throughout, in 1988 when she was 20 years old. That's fine.
I find it also interesting that she apparently changed her name also to Stratton.
Yes. I think that's interesting too. Did she want to just be affiliated with her sister?
Probably.
Or...
I know that she also worked in the movie industry. I don't think as an actress. I'm not sure. I think in the more production part of movies.
I hope she had a long, happy life.
I think she's still alive. I'm not sure.
Oh, she could be. I'm so used to talking about people from 200 years ago. Of course, she could very well still be alive, and I, in that case, still wish her well.
I think they divorced in 2016, 2018, something like that.
Okay.
And I think Peter Bogdanovich has passed away.
Yeah, I think so. Dorothy Stratten, she was one woman among far too many who trusted someone who ultimately stole her life. Every day, countless others face similar things behind closed doors. It's essential to recognize the signs and listen to the concerns of others and intervene if something feels wrong. We talked about this too during our Lauren Dunn Astley case, right? About breakup violence and how at risk you are, especially when you're trying to end things.
It's the highest risk moment.
That's it. Yep. And so if you or someone you love is experiencing abuse, please reach out for help. You're not alone, and you deserve better. And we'll have resources linked in our episode notes. And that's the very, very sad death of beautiful Dorothy Stratten. She was gorgeous.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
And apparently very kind. She also, when she was already working in LA, I read that she sent home money to her mom so she could, support her family back home in Vancouver. And she sent money for Louise's, I think, braces and stuff like that.
Oh, that's nice.
I know she was 18 years old at the time, and still, even though being mixed up in this glamorous lifestyle, she still took care of her family back home.
That's right.
And that she had her little sister come and spend time with her. I think she was a lovely person from all accounts.
She was. She really was, I think, just she was beautiful on the inside and out. But even if she wasn't, even if she was like a solidly mediocre human who wasn't particularly attractive, she still doesn't deserve to be murdered
of course
like
not. I hope we don't have to say that.
I always think, I just wanted to clarify that. Not that I think you were saying that. It's just always every time there's somebody beautiful who's murdered, they're like, look how beautiful she was. It was such a shame.
She lit up the room.
She really, yeah, right?
Also, beauty lies in the eye of the beholder, so.
So true. So true.
Anyway.
Oh, such a sad episode.
Very.
Do you have something good this week?
Yes, I do, because I didn't mention it last week, because last week was my mom. Something good. When you were away in Florida, a package arrived with lots of amazing stuff, and I was so happy unpacking it. And my husband even said, wow, Annie knows you really well.
That package only took like 3 months to find you. I was honestly expecting it to turn back up here because it had been such a long time. But I'm so glad it made it. Yay!
It was so good. I loved everything. Love it. Especially
so
the
good.
Beagles pajama pants. I've been wearing them.
I love those.
A lot already.
I got those at Snow's in Orleans, which has an expanded pet section now where their hardware section used to be, which I have mixed feelings about, but still one of my favorite old-time stores. Yeah.
They have pockets.
Gotta have pockets.
How about you? What's your something good?
Oh, I have happy news. I have 2 younger brothers, and the oldest of the 2 has just gotten engaged.
Yay! Congratulations.
So I'm so excited. I'm so excited. Hopefully I don't drive my future sister-in-law crazier than usual than I already do. And, I love weddings. I'm just excited.
So joyful. Such a joyful.
And I love her. We all love her. She's wonderful. So I think she's going to be I know she's going to be a really great addition to the family, and just can't wait to get to know her better.
Amazing.
Yeah. Happy times.
That's good. We need happy times.
We do. All right. Well, please leave us a rating or review if you enjoyed this. We haven't had anyone leave us a rating since the very beginning of March.
Yeah. What's going on?
It's been a while.
What's going on?
I know.
Come on.
You don't have to leave a long review. I know it takes time, but just give us a quick, that would be great. If you want to get in touch with us, our email address is freshhellpodcast@gmail.com. Our website is freshhellpodcast.com.
Yeah, and if that story of Dorothy Stratten was interesting to you, if the time period is interesting to you, come over to Patreon and check out our I don't even want to call it reviews, like we're talking episode by episode recaps. Exactly.
We're doing episode recaps of
Welcome to Chippendales.
Yeah. That's right. So right now we're in the middle of Welcome to Chippendales. We're going to tell you everything. Yeah. So if you don't have Hulu, it's fine. We're going to tell you the whole thing.
We'll talk you through it.
We will.
We even were kind of era appropriate styling. So.
Oh, I got some new stuff. Wait till you see my new duds for the next episode.
Ooh, I can't wait.
Oh, it's going to be something. I'll tell you what.
I think that's it. Also, join our Facebook group. That's always fun.
Yes. I love our Facebook group.
I do too.
It's just the nicest group of people. Yeah, come say hi on Instagram. Like and subscribe on YouTube, please. We would love it if you like and subscribe on YouTube. That would be so kind.
Yeah, you can also get an early access subscription on YouTube and Spotify. Still, iTunes is giving us some trouble. We're working on that. It's always the same with iTunes.
iTunes is always hard to get a hold of.
Yeah.
It's fine.
And I think that's it. Please tell your pets we said hi, hug them, cuddle them, treat them so kindly. Treat humans kindly if they deserve it. And treat yourself kindly.
And as Winston Churchill once famously said, if you're going through hell,
keep going. Tschüss.
Bye-bye.